even though it was legal, the SEC rejected it, and then we had to sue the SEC in the American court system to get the SEC to do what was on the books and records as law.
Lugano Plan B podcast presents Bitcoin and TradFi, Can It All Be One? With Anthony Scaramucci and Max Kei.
My name is Max. I'm CEO and founder of TradFi, and it's an institutional lending platform where we bridge institutions with Bitcoin borrowers, whether it is corporates or private individuals.
And I'm Anthony Scaramucci, the managing partner of Skybridge Capital, which is a $3.5 billion asset manager based in New York. And about a third of our business now is in cryptocurrencies, mostly Bitcoin, but we do own Solana and Avalanche.
Who is Anthony? What's his take on the Fed and Bitcoin?
Well, I'm 60. I'm 35 years on Wall Street, and when you get to a certain age, you get stubborn in your habits. I was very good and reasonably knowledgeable on stocks and bonds, and when Bitcoin was introduced to me in 2012, I really didn't understand it, and as an institutional investor, I was afraid to purchase it for my clients, and frankly wouldn't have even known technically how to have bought it for myself at that point. It was reintroduced to me in 2014. Again, I probably said, okay, not for me. But in 2017, when I worked in the White House shortly, I was introduced to a couple of people in the Fed who had written an article, a white paper on digitizing the US dollar. And I said, wait, on the blockchain? They said, yes, on the blockchain. And I said, okay, I need to understand this better. And so when I returned to my firm, I made my first Bitcoin purchase, and then we started getting closer to Bitcoin and became advocates. But I'll just say this quickly, the more research you do in Bitcoin, the more research you do in understanding Bitcoin, you go towards Bitcoin. I have yet to meet a person, an investor of any age for that matter, who does the homework on Bitcoin that says, oh, no, this is not for me. You have to understand it first. But we have a lot of Bitcoin, actually.
How can a banker bring Bitcoin into traditional finance?
There's no former bankers, as they say, so I was orange pilled by one of my customers back in the days.
What year?
It was, I think, 2014, and
good.
Then 2016, I basically left the banks. I was vice president for one of the banks. I left it and kickstarted our own project. And we started it with a very ethical approach. We decided we're going to take our core values from Bitcoin white paper, which is like being non-custodial, being Bitcoin only, and trying to avoid middlemen. We built one project, and then on top of that, we had a certain interest from institutions, particularly from certain banks, and they said, we want to use that. We want to explore Bitcoin as a collateral because we have liquidity. We want to flow that liquidity, but we want to be over collateralized, and we want to have a highly liquid collateral that we can liquidate 24/7, which is the case of Bitcoin. And we decided, okay, we're going to build an institutional type of thing, and we built TradFi, and currently we're just onboarding institutions who are meeting the borrowers on our platform, competing for them. And they're using Bitcoin as a collateral asset. They're floating their liquidity. They're pretty much happy with that because, again, it's over collateralized, and because Bitcoin is the ultimate pristine collateral that you can liquidate. And for lender, it's very crucial. For any bank, for any TradFi, for any fund, it's very crucial that you issue the loan, but the collateral is actually highly valued, highly liquid asset out there.
So can I ask a question? So if you have the Bitcoin and you want to lend it to you in exchange for an interest rate, do you lock up the person lending the Bitcoin? Is it a 30-day lockup? Is it a?
We only offer borrowing against Bitcoin.
Right.
So it's from the institution point of view, they have fiat and stable coins.
Right.
And borrowers have Bitcoin. So you can only earn yield having fiat or stable coins.
I see. Okay. So
because
I couldn't put my Bitcoin with you and earn yield off of the Bitcoin.
No, but you can borrow.
Right.
The reason for that is quite simple. I'm not a fan of yield generating on top of Bitcoin because I believe that Bitcoin as an asset is already like yield generating asset. You just need to put it aside, put it in cold storage, store it properly, 4 or 5
Good.
years more.
Good, but if I
you'll get-
wanted to borrow fiat currency from you, I would
Yes.
take my Bitcoin, I could give
Yeah.
it to you, and you
Yeah.
could say, okay, here's a loan to value number,
Yeah.
here's an interest
Yeah.
rate, and
Yeah.
you'd give me cash.
Yeah. We'll bridge you with certain lenders that we have. Basically, we're acting as an eBay for Bitcoin loans. I mean,
I
we
like it.
provide technical infrastructure and we bring liquidity providers and we market this to the borrowers.
So Max is probably 10, possibly 15 years ahead of traditional finance. So everybody in traditional finance will be in Max's business, but he is light years ahead of them, and so he'll have a gigantic business by the time they catch up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, congratulations. Can I ask him one more question? Do you don't mind? Because I'm fascinated. So if I gave you put the Bitcoin on collateral, what are the durations of the loans? Can you
Well,
call it instantly, like a margin loan at a brokerage house? Or would you say, okay, Anthony, you have the Bitcoin on collateral, we'll give you the loan for a year.
there's basically no limits on that way. You can agree with your lender 1 month, 2 months, 12 months.
Okay.
We're going to increase the limits to 24 months, then we're going to do 36 months. So basically, most of the Bitcoiners that are retail Bitcoiners, I mean private individuals, they prefer having longer terms. I mean,
Right, of course.
the people, like if you will look at the graph of Bitcoin price, you see that there's a certain cycle, and usually it's 4 years. And I mean, we have a huge demand from the private individuals who want to borrow against their Bitcoin, but they want to do for 4 or 5 years because they believe there's a certain cycle coming in. And while
The interest is paid in Bitcoin, or you would take fiat?
you will be paid as a lender. You need to be repaid in fiat or in
Okay.
stablecoin if you should
Okay.
stable. But if borrower wants to do that and he agrees with you, he can repay from the collateral with Bitcoin.
Right.
I mean, if there's
And burn off a little bit of the Bitcoin.
yeah,
Got
and
it.
if there's liquidation happening, obviously there's Bitcoin you will get as a lender.
Right. Smart.
Bitcoin-backed lending is the future. Bitcoin is pure. It can't be corrupted.
Well, before we came into the podcast room, obviously I studied Max's business, but I didn't understand some of the nuances of what the loan agreement would look like. But this is the business of the future, because what Max has identified, and he got there way ahead of me, he got there in 2014, that this is a very pure, to use his words, is a very pure asset, and it's a hard asset. And so one of the things about Bitcoin, it can't be technically disrupted by the central banking community, which has a tendency to inflate away and demineralize the asset, if you will. And so a result of which, as Bitcoin goes up the adoption curve, the asset that he's asking for in collateral becomes a lot more valuable. And again, I'm not going to say Michael Saylor-like numbers of $13 million a coin, but there's no reason why Bitcoin over the next 10 years couldn't trade to the market capitalization of gold. And so you have an asset trading right now at let's just call it $1.3 trillion. Could it go up 10 or 12 times in the next decade? And if I'm right about that, and I believe you think along these lines, he's now got an appreciating asset that he's using as collateral. So it's a very defensive mechanism for his lending business from a risk management point of view. Do I have it right?
Yes,
Yeah.
completely right.
Is Bitcoin institutional adoption a threat to Bitcoin first companies?
So I'm going to answer it broadly in terms of globally, but then also answer it in terms of the United States, if that's okay, because we are way behind the rest of the world in the United States from a regulatory perspective. And so where Max has a real big competitive advantage with his business is that he's got a global footprint, and I'm assuming you're doing this outside of the United States.
Yes.
And so he's able to benefit from what I think is fairer, more propitious regulation globally. In the U.S., I think Max would have a harder time doing this business because of the regulatory constraints on lending and the regulatory constraints on banking. So I think it's a phenomenal business, and I think over time, many Wall Street participants, hedge fund managers, institutional investors, are going to want to be a part of this. Going to want to be a part of this business, but they're going to want to be on Max's side of the business, frankly, because Max has a better mousetrap than what they have. You know, if he's able to garner reasonable or above market or at market interest rates with that type of collateral, these people eventually want to join him, but they're going to be held back by regulation. So Max is going to get a 10-year start on everybody. So we got to keep an eye on Max, okay? Because we know
Thank you.
Max is going to have a great career ahead.
I mean, the case is that we are actually available for US, and the reason for that is that we don't provide the liquidity and the loans by ourselves. We're working with regulated liquidity providers as a tech environment. So that's the case. So the case with the platform that we're building, being market agnostic and being like liquidity provider, provision agnostic, is that we want to keep things simple. We want to be like technical environment providers. We don't want to get borrowers, or we don't want to get lenders. We don't want to like fight for the customers. We just provide a complementary service for banks, funds, and whoever has liquidity.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, Max, but my view of Bitcoin, do you have a similar view? Are you as bullish as that, more bullish or less bullish than what I said?
No, I think I am more bullish, I
More
would
bullish.
say. I mean,
Okay, good. You see, that's the caution of age. You know, I've been humbled by life and markets. You see, if I was young like Max in 2014, maybe I would have bought the Bitcoin with him, you know? Missed the opportunity due to being slow-footed and risk-averse.
No, I mean, my bullishness comes from not only particular economical point of view. I was, we spoke before, I was born in Soviet Union, and over the course of my lifetime, government changed the currency and did the debasement of the currency 3 times.
Yep.
So I experienced that 3 times. So for most of us in Eastern Europe, you don't need to sell the Bitcoin because it's the best property that you can own out there. It's yours property, actually.
See, what we have benefited from in the West, which may be expiring, but we've benefited in the West, is we've had decentralized systems around our money, and we've had some level of independence in the central banking community. And so, yeah, they're appointed by politicians, but then they're given broad discretion of how to set rates and how to try to contain inflation. But what we have found globally, and this is not just contemporary, what we've found over 5,000 years of history, if politicians get involved with the money, they are like drunk drivers with the money, Max. You know, they'll run the money off the road. They'll make more of it. They'll restructure. They'll replace it. They'll add zeros, and then next thing you know, they're taking zeros away. And it always hurts the poor. It always hurts the middle class because these are the people that make their money off their time and their labor. And so one of the sad parts about it, and the reason why I love Bitcoin, and I'm sure you probably love it for a similar reason, is that it can protect the poor. It can protect somebody who's a laborer, who's earning their money from their time and from their energy, you know, as my dad was. You know, my dad was a blue-collar worker. If you paid him $1,000, but you had 10% inflation over the next 6 months, then he only really had $900 of purchasing power. You stole 10% of my dad's time, his labor. And this is why Bitcoin is going to be phenomenally successful, because it's a protector against the capricious nature of governments who are always inclined to inflate away the value.
How can self-custody attract traditional finance institutions if they lose control over clients' funds?
It should be simple, first of all. Like from the technical perspective, it should be like easy UI, UX, easy like value proposition, easy competitive advantages and explanation. But there is also a lot of banks customer, they're helping us because there's huge demand on the retail side and the corporate side. You know, I mean, if you look at the banks, like we take an example of Switzerland. And I believe that Switzerland is like 10 years ahead in terms of crypto and Bitcoin regulation of the rest of the world. And they just have a huge demand from the customers. They want to buy Bitcoin, they want to store Bitcoin, they want to take a loan against Bitcoin. and customers push the banks, and banks needs to innovate. They needs to be forced to innovate. But there's also a very good point that Anthony said, that regulation plays a crucial role, specifically for US. Regulation also, the framework plays a crucial role for banks to adopt, because in the end of the game, I mean, government decides the rules, and banks are, you can hate the bank, you can say whatever you want, but they're playing by the playbook that governments releases. So for us, the most crucial part is actually educating about the tools that we can provide to them, and then their customers are doing the rest. And I mean, with ETFs coming in, BlackRock ETFs, with economies that are like money printing and it's worsening and inflation's growing, I mean, banks are started to look to being a bit more innovative, hedging the risks. And I think like they already know gold, and now they're looking into something new. And obviously Bitcoin can like provide them a good thing for that. I mean,
Agree. I mean, it's very well said. I mean, and that's the vision, you know. And again, not to beat a dead horse on this, but the United States is so far behind. And the great irony of that is that we have in the U.S. the deepest, most liquid capital market for the last 125 years, but we've lost a step in this area of technological innovation. You know, so it's a demographic thing again, though, because these are fossils. These politicians, they're in their 70s and 80s, and so they're not paying close enough attention. If you look at the way it gets voted on in the U.S., if you're in your 70s or 80s, you don't like Bitcoin or crypto. If you're in your 30s or 40s, they're voting for it. And so we have to wait for these people to retire. But they never retire in the United States, the politicians. They want to stay forever for some reason.
Yeah, I can't believe your candidates a few weeks ago were like senile guy and...
Well, now we only have
Less
one. We
senile
had
guy.
two senile guys, but now we have one
Yeah,
senile guy. Yeah.
they one very
bad.
senile guy and not that senile guy, and I'm wondering, is it this really the best this country has to offer?
Well, the job became very complicated and also puts a lot of pressure on the family, and we attack our politicians viciously in the country. You know, the negative advertising and so forth. You know, one of the politicians said to me, "Have you ever met a smart politician?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, because we're attacked so much, everyone thinks we're so stupid." You know.
Is Bitcoin at risk of being captured by institutions?
So I think it's a great question. I want to hear Max's answer, so I'll be very brief. All I'm saying is that to get the thing ignited in the United States, we had to take a traditional route. And so we had to go through the ETF process. And even the SEC, even though it was legal, the SEC rejected it, and then we had to sue the SEC in the American court system to get the SEC to do what was on the books and records as law. And so if you want Americans to participate, and again, that economy is still 27% of the world's economy, you've got to go through this more traditional process. But I would just submit to you, BlackRock right now has $26 billion of Bitcoin. I think they own approximately 400,000 Bitcoins. In the scale of things, Bitcoin being a $1.3 trillion asset, which I predict will be a $17 trillion asset. Could BlackRock have 100 or 200 billion? Sure. But I would just ask you to look at gold as an example. The GLD ETF is a very small percentage of the overall market capitalization of gold, and I predict that will happen with Bitcoin. So this worry that Bitcoin purists have, I don't necessarily see. I'd be interested to hear Max's take.
Well, I mean, everyone wanted mass adoption like a couple of years ago. That's what you get when you get mass adoption. I mean,
there you go.
How you want to achieve that? You won't be able to achieve that through retail market. You need to adopt institution, and institution has a certain way to adopt that, meaning ETFs should be easy tradable. I mean, we can say whatever we can say. It's like a paper Bitcoin. It's not real Bitcoin. You're not holding the real Bitcoin. But that's how things work. I mean, and I think that the reason for institutional products as DebiFi or even ETFs to exist is that I think we took a bottom to the up approach first, which is wrong. And I think we need to move from the bottom to the down approach. And I think we need to present certain solution to institution. And as adoption among institutions will grow, we'll effectively reach hyper-Bitcoinization, meaning that imagine the future where you can go to your bank saying, okay, I want to deposit my Bitcoin with you, and they will not make big eyes. They will say, fine, we want that. I mean, you will be a great customer to us. And in terms of price manipulation, like everyone is afraid that like institutions will manipulate the price of Bitcoin. First of all, game theory, why they need to do that? I mean, it's working perfectly in that way. And the second, as the price of Bitcoin will grow, it will take more and more resources to eventually try to manipulate. And it's eventually at some point it's going to be impossible. The reference to the gold fund, S&P GLD, or the fund,
the ETF, yep.
ETF, it's actually pretty much correct. It's a huge fund, but if you will compare to the whole capitalization of the gold market, it's actually a relatively small part.
What's needed to fully integrate Bitcoin into institutional portfolios?
I mean, frameworks, regulatory frameworks, definitely. Like, give an example of Europe or Switzerland. Again, there's a clear framework now in Europe, and like banks are not afraid anymore of the word Bitcoin. They're happy to work with it. We've seen a lot of requests from the banks. You know, they want to explore this opportunity, but also again providing different type of tools. We see that market is actually shifting from building products, which I don't say is necessarily great, but the market shift is coming from building products for retail investors, and they're building more products for institutions. And if institutions will adopt Bitcoin, eventually their customers is going to use it as well.
So I'll speak, I agree with everything Max said, but I'll speak from the angle of an institutionalist, if you will. And I'll tell a quick story, and that's the state of Wisconsin. About 2 months ago, Max, state of Wisconsin announced that they had purchased $150 million of IBIT, which is the BlackRock ETF. Yeah. And so this was unheard of for a big institution in the US. And so the press went to speak to the CIO, and he basically said, well, I've looked at the landscape. At some point, consultants are going to come to me, and they're going to say that a model portfolio that my pension fund is going to be compared to is going to have Bitcoin in it. You know, it has stocks and bonds and cash and private equity and hedge funds and gold, et cetera, but there'll be a wedge in that model portfolio, that modern portfolio theory that has some Bitcoin. Yeah. And so if I'm not long Bitcoin now, I'm going to be short Bitcoin the day that they announce that. And so that's coming. Is it 3 years from today? Is it 5 years from today? I don't know. But hopefully I'll be back at this conference. You'll ask me that question. I'll say, hey, model portfolios for large institutions now require those institutions to benchmark some of their money off of Bitcoin. And when that day happens, that's where the adoption is.
Agree, 100%.